All right, so let's just continue on. We're going to talk about functions today, or in this video. So let's get started. So what is a function? And before I'm going to answer that, I kind of want to just discuss what an algorithm is. And really, an algorithm is just a fancy word for a set of instructions. We do algorithms all the time in our everyday lives. For example, washing our hair. Get your hair wet, apply the shampoo, lather, rinse, repeat. This repeat's kind of funny. If this were a computer, I'd just do this forever. But anyway, that's all an algorithm is. It's just a set of instructions. So when we talk about a function, it's really just a named set of instructions. We define this once, and it can be called multiple times. So for instance, with like washing hair, we would define it once as this method, and you'll notice I'll say method or function, same thing, you'll hear it called both. So I'm going to define the method or the function once, and I'll give it the set of instructions, and then later in my code, I can call that as many times as I want. So if my hair is dirty, I'll wash my hair. If I have OCD, then maybe I'll wash my hair 3 times. But the point here is you define it once. This is the method or function definition. And here we call it or we invoke the method. Those are just some of the terms you'll hear. So functions can and usually take in data and return data. For instance, if we're defining an add function, we're going to define this with 2 parameters, number 1 and number 2. And then we can return this number plus num2. So that's the definition. And then we can call the method multiple times and actually pass in values. And this returns the sum, so we can throw those into variables. So keeping on this example, when we define our method, when we define these parameters, this is what we call them. We call these parameters. This is the data that the function can accept. So I'm naming these parameters num1, num2, and then I can then use them in the function. When I call the function, I pass the function arguments. So here I add 1 and 1. So 1 and 1, those are arguments to my function. Num1 and num2, those are the parameters in my function definition. So I just want to really get this clear. We have a method definition, and then in our code we can call the method. So think of functions as their own little apps. And these parameters, you can kind of think of these as variables. And these variables are only scoped or visible within the function. So I have this num1, num2. These are for this function and this function only. This allows us to reuse names. So we'll look at this example in code, but let's just look at this example really quick here. Because here I'm defining a variable num1 and I'm setting it equal to 2. Now this num1 here is not going to be the same as this num1, even though they have the same name. This is something that takes a little time to get used to, is things just are named the same, but they're not the same thing. So here num1 is equal to 2, and then I'm calling my add function with num1, which is really just 2, and then I also pass it 1. So then when my method gets called, it's passed 2 and 1, so really num1 would be 2 plus num2 would be 1, and so my sum would be 3. Now if I try to put num2, I'm going to get an error here because num2, this is a parameter to my function. So it's only going to be defined within the context of this function. So this is not defined. Num1 would be defined because I defined it here. But this num1 and those names, those are not the same thing. And we just got to kind of work through this. People get really confused about naming and scope and passing arguments versus parameters. So just some guidelines with functions. Keep your functions short, meaning like lines of code. You don't want them too long. You want to keep them short and simple. We're going to want to do blocking and indenting. Just make sure our code is following conventions to the language. It's easy to read. Our functions should also only do one thing. If you're explaining your function and you're using the word and a lot, that might be a hint that you're trying to do too much within a function, and that you can probably break it up into smaller functions. Function names should say what they do. Just like with variables, we need to be good at naming our functions, because this is going to come down to our code being readable. Functions are going to help keep our code dry. So this DRY acronym stands for do not repeat yourself. So if you find yourself copying and pasting code in your app, that's probably a good sign you should throw that code into a function and then call the function multiple times. Keeping your code dry is going to help you maintain your code. It's going to help you debug your code, and it's going to make your code once again more readable and comprehensible. And this last one, avoid side effects. I just want to throw this one in here. I'm not going to get in it with this lecture, but that's a general good guideline of writing a function. So yeah, let's go ahead and do a demo. I'm going to do this in REPL IT. You can do this in VS Code or just anywhere you can run Ruby. So to define a function in Ruby, we'd use the def, and then we give it a method name, and then end. So this is the name we come up with. So maybe I want to come up with a greeting function. And here I'm just going to put hello. So I've defined my function. So this is I'm just going to call this method definition, method/function. And then here I can call, you'll hear call or invoke. You'll hear both of those terms, my function. Greeting. Now, a lot of languages make you do the parentheses. With Ruby, if you don't have any arguments, you don't have to use the parentheses. You could just do it like that. But I'm going to throw the parentheses in there just to kind of show we're calling this function. And we can call this multiple times. Let's just do it twice. So I run this, and we say hello twice. So you define your function once, you can call it multiple times. Let's make this a little more interesting by giving it a name, like by giving it a parameter. So now I'm having a parameter name in my function, and then I can use that within my function. And I'm just going to interpolate this name variable. So now my function can take, when I call it, I can pass it an argument. Run that. And now when I call it, I can say hello James, hello Tony. But yeah, if I try to put name, name is not defined. Name is only scoped right here to this function. I could define a name. Let's get rid of this and let's call my greeting. Now here's another place where people get confused. I'm reusing this variable name, which is name. Now, these are not the same either. If I run this and say greeting, well, now I'm getting an error. See, Ruby's saying, hey, this greeting function is expecting an argument. I gave it 0 and it's expecting 1. So I need to pass this a value. And that value could be a variable called name. And now it works. So these are not the same variable. This name is a parameter to my greeting function. This name right here, this is a variable. But it can get confusing because we can start overloading terms and overloading variable names. Okay. Let's keep going with that, or with this little demo. Let's just go back to our, oh wait, I wanted to also say one more thing here. So when you're starting to code, you're going to be using the puts a lot in your function. Now, that's generally not, that is actually, when you get into, once you get a little more familiar code and actually writing code, you're really never going to use the puts statement unless it's for debugging purposes. Like your function is not going to put stuff to the console because your users aren't going to be using the console. So generally what functions do is they don't put a value to the console, they just return a value. So I'm going to get rid of that put statement. And now I can have, I can assign this value, or I can, so now my function is returning a string. So I can assign that to a variable. I'm going to call greeting. So I can call my function. Let's actually call this greet. So here I'm calling the function greet. I'm passing it the argument John. And that's going to return the string hello John. And then I'm assigning that to the variable greeting. And then here I could put out that value. Now if this was a normal app or like a web app or JavaScript or something like that, maybe I could take this greeting and embed it in HTML. But we're not there yet, so we are generally going to put stuff out. But really, I think it's a good practice to have your functions return data. There we go. Now in Ruby, most languages, there's this keyword called return. In Ruby, if you don't have the return keyword in your function, it's going to return the last line of code. So our last line of code here is a string, is this string hello with the name. So it's going to return that. But there is this return keyword in JavaScript, in Ruby, which says, hey, return this from the function. So let's do this. Let's let's kind of show, let's go do another example with this return. So I'm going to call this function, I'm going to call this return demo. And this is going to take in a number. And what I'm going to have this do is if, my number is even, double it. Else, let's triple it. Okay. So what I could do here is I could do a little if statement. I could say if number dot even I'm going to return number times 2. And then here, I could do number times 3. And we're going to look at this. Well, actually, let's do it this way first. Let's do this else. Return number times 3. We'll do this with an if else first. So I'm going to say, let's put this to a value. So val equals return demo. We'll call the function. We'll pass it 2. So 2 is even, so I'm expecting this function to double this number, put it into the val. So I'm expecting val to be 4. So let's put that out to the console and just test this. So that's 4. Let's try this with an even number, or sorry, an odd number. Give that a different name. So there's 4, it doubles my even and it triples my 9. Okay. So what I want to show is I really don't need to write this as an if else, because if I use this return keyword in my function is going to return that, and then it's going to stop where it's at. So I can just have this be an if end. And this is actually the preferred, like the cleaner way to write it. So if my number is even, then return number times 2. And then the function's going to exit right here. Then function exits. Let's just do a puts here just to show it this. So I'm going to comment out this one where we do an odd number. And also I could do a put statement right here. Let's do this, puts dead code. Okay. So I'm calling this with an even number. So what's going to happen is we're going to hit this if statement and we're going to return number times 2. And let's see if we hit this put statement or if we log that put statement as well. So we just get the 4. We don't even get this puts right here within the if statement. So the function exits right here. So this is technically what's considered dead code, because I have an if statement and then right here I have a return. So anything below this, within this if statement, that code's never going to get executed. It's impossible. There's no physical way that this is ever going to run. And this is what's referred to as dead code. And dead code is always not, even though it's not going to like cause bugs, it's just going to mess up your code, and it's just really bad style. Because why would you want code in there that's never going to be run? It would make you assume there's probably some logic error going on. So we can get rid of that. So the return, just wanted to show, this is really important, that the return stops the function and will return whatever you say you want it to. So if our number is not even, so let's go ahead and demo our odd number. We run that. So there, we don't hit this if statement, so we don't hit that return. So we do hit this puts. So we log that to the console and then return number times 3. Now really, since this is the last line in this function, I really don't need that return there. But this return here I do need. So let's run our even again. Because what's going to happen here, if I don't have the return here, I'm going to take my number and I'm going to times it by 2. Now, I'm not storing that value to number. It's the computer's just going to do 3 times 2, which is going to be 6, and then it's not going to do anything with that value. So if I do this return demo on 2, it's going to do this function, which really isn't going to do anything in this if statement, and then it's going to return 2 times 3, which is going to return 6. So there's my 6, which is wrong, because if it's an even number, I want it to double and not to triple. So I absolutely 100% need the return here, because I don't want the code to finish. Most other languages, you have to have the return. So if you want to do that, that's fine. And there we go. That is fixed. One other thing I want to show is as far as concerns with variables and functions and scope, let's create some variables. Let's do like, these are just demo ones, so I could do like age 21. Let's do at name, or let's do title. It doesn't really matter what these are called. And then let's do a global variable. Remember, let's just use this. We'll just do these instance variables. That would be better, I guess. Sorry. Local. So this is a local variable. It doesn't have the @ sign or the $sign. Let's do our global. And this will be global var. So remember, the @ sign is denoting in Ruby that this is going to be an instance variable. The global, the $sign is saying this is going to be a global variable. So there we have a scope demo. So let's go ahead and put our instance. Let's go ahead and put our global. We'll just do these first, and you'll see why in 1 second. Now, I'm going to show something that you might run into, so I'm going to run this. Nothing happened. Now, why is nothing running? I'm having this puts inside of here. Now, just to remember, this is me defining the function. Me defining the function is not actually calling it. Ruby's not going to call it. I'm just defining it. To call it, I actually have to come down and call it. And in Ruby, you can use the parentheses or not. So we can now run this. I'm going to call it twice. But it logs both of those because I called it twice. But those are both being logged. So that's all fine and dandy. So let's keep going. So what happens if I try to put the local? Well, Well, now I'm going to run into an error. So this variable is not defined because local variables cannot be scoped inside of functions. So if I had a variable, a local variable outside my function, and I want to use it in my function, how do I do that? I pass it to the function. And let's just overload some names here. So, and then, because let's see if it works. Okay, so now that's working. Now this is a question I like to ask, and I want you to think about this. So I have 4 names called local here. What if I change? So first of all, my first question is, does this have to be called local here in my function definition? And the answer to that is no. This can be called whatever I want. But then I need to use that. If I want to use the reference to that, that's what I have to call it within my function. Now, does this have to be called local right here? Yes, it does, because I'm referring to this. So if I change this to x, then that would have to be x. Let's go back to local. I'm going to call this x. So this is just my function definition. And remember, functions are kind of like their own little applications. And if I can define a variable inside a function. I can just say age equals 12. Puts age. So I can define a variable inside a function, but it's only going to be scoped to that function. So this is going to be an error because age is not defined because I've only defined it in my function. So I can only use it in my function. So what I could do is I could put local inside of here. I could create a variable called local inside of here. Set it equal to 12 and then puts that out. So here I'm setting local equal to 12. And notice I have another variable up here called local. Even though they have the same name, they're not the same because of this scope rule. So if I put local here, let's also just do a message so we can see this, like some dashes. So there's the dash, 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 puts local, that's the local variable. And actually, sorry, I wanted to run this after I called the function just to show that this is not changing anything. So let's do it after we call our function. And I'm going to just get rid of these as well so we don't log too much of this stuff. Okay, so let's look at what's going on here. I have this local variable. I can get rid of these too. I have my local that is equal to local variable. And then I have my scope demo definition, which has the parameter x. And then inside of here, I have another variable called local that is scoped to this function. And that's my first log. And when I put this one on line 5, there's my 12. And then I can put x, which is local variable, because that's what I'm passing to the function. And then I call my puts again just to clear it, and then local was not changed. Now I know this is probably pretty confusing the first time you kind of learn about this, but I think this is really, really important to kind of wrap your head around. This might be something you watch a couple times. I really also think it's important that you go and code this out, create your own little examples, and really get this solidified in your head about these variables and passing parameters and passing arguments to function, because this will really help you work with functions better and work with variables better. So I think I'll stop it here. Yeah, any questions, leave them in the comments. And y'all have a good day.